Thank you all for joining us this evening. We appreciate your time. This is kind of our second annual regional advocacy training, kind of looking, where things are going on in the states, specifically, what has occurred this past year and what we expect and forecast for next year. It has been a very strong year for state advocacy. A lot is attributed to the involvement of retailers, but also Glenn in shepherding our state association program. One of the things I'll preface by saying is the association is, prepared next year to reinvest into state associations. We are working on a grant program to help spur state association advocacy and infrastructure. So that's a new development for 2024. We'll be rolling out that programs. For those of you that I may not have met, I'm Joshua Habursky, the Deputy Executive Director and Head of Government Affairs. I oversee our department and really work on the federal stuff, the Food and Drug Administration, White House, and Congress. But coordinate with Glenn on a lot of the state stuff, who Glenn is our state lead and has done a fantastic job. Before I kick it over to Glenn, I just want to give everyone a little bit of a basis on where things stand federally. Congress, kind of underwent a little bit of a chaotic period with the House, potential shutdowns, all of the above. As far as we're concerned, position-wise with the association, we're advocating for some small business specific legislation, fighting retail crime, credit card processing fees, things like that. We're also being mindful of potential tax increases. One of the things that Glenn and I pride ourselves on in the 3 years that we've been working together on government affairs, there hasn't been a legislative tax increase at the state or federal level. And we want to continue that. There's a little bit less of a concern federally this go around because the last year it was included in the Build Back Better budget of the president. This year, with Republicans controlling the House, we don't anticipate a tax increase to be included in any must-pass legislation. But we're still cognizant of that and taking meetings on it. On the regulatory side, there is cause for concern. We are engaging next week with the Office of Management and Budget and their Office of Regulatory Affairs on the characterizing flavor rule. That is something that the association opposes, and we will be, poking holes in that rule and ensuring that the agency understands the retail impact. We have heard from our members loud and clear that, flavored cigars and cigars in the definition of characterizing, that's very unclear by the Food and Drug Administration, would be very problematic for our membership. So we're raising that. Another regulatory issue that's on the horizon, the tobacco manufacturing product standards. That is something that we also oppose. This would create lab-like settings. It's a regulation that's meant for pharmaceutical companies and food companies that was extended to tobacco products. And the intention of the Food and Drug Administration and their Center for Tobacco Products was to extend that rule on domestic as well as foreign manufacturing facilities. We have raised a number of concerns. We have worked with the Small Business Administration, which they have also raised concerns about economic impact, international commerce impact, everything from immigration to environmental impact. So that's an area that we are challenging. The third regulation that's a little bit on the horizon, but in a bit of a distant horizon, is the nicotine maximum threshold. And, this is meant for cigarettes. However, there is a fear that this could extend to cigars and more specifically premium cigars. I should also say one of the things that we as an association with the characterizing flavor rule are exerting is the need to exempt pipe tobacco from that rule. So there's a lot on the regulatory front. One of the main questions that I get is about the lawsuit and the litigation side. Yes, we won against the Food and Drug Administration. We're 3-0. The last one was an overall challenge to the deeming rule as it relates to the Administrative Procedures Act. The Food and Drug Administration has appealed that decision. We will be fighting that in the courts. But the prevailing guidance is that the Food and Drug Administration does not have regulatory authority over premium cigars. That's what a district court decided, and that's what the current state of play is. We will guide folks and provide additional information on that as it becomes available, but that's the current status. I'm not going to speak too into detail on that, as this is an active litigation piece, and neither Glenn or I are the lawyers. We work with the lawyers to develop the arguments, but we are not here to give legal advice on that. Glenn, I think if you want to kind of give a state overview, and then we'll pause and take some questions from folks.
Thank you. And if anybody tunes into this later, we apologize. There was some confusion about the time zone we were launching this, so I want to apologize for anybody that shows up on Mountain Time instead of Central Time, but because apparently there were two different issuances on that. I want to split things up into really threefold. One's the overarching issues that we project that could be confronted in state legislatures in 2024, then go state by state with the issues that we think are going to be raised. And then lastly, tools that you can use to help with this given legislation, whether it's pro or con. So with that, the issues that we traditionally have to address during the state legislative season are flavor bans, taxes, local regulation, and local regulatory authority, and making sure that we're not getting caught up in legislation where vape and e-cigarettes are the real target, but they end up pulling in every other tobacco product because of the overarching theme of nicotine regulation. And that's been a new strategy used by the antis to get at us. And all too often, we're finding that premium handmade cigars and pipe tobacco get swept up in that, and then we end up having to advocate for exemptions to legislation that we shouldn't have to be even involved with. Last year, Josh and I and our team had to peruse 7,000 to 10,000 pieces of legislation because of the theme of nicotine and overarching legislation on things that deal with cannabis and vape. And then we have to chisel that down to about 250 bills of true concern. And then that chiseled down to about 50 of, shall we say, national concern in the states. So that just kind of gives you a lay of the land of what goes through these legislatures every given January. With that, I want to give a state-by-state overview for the 13 states that are the subject of this call. First of all, the flavor ban issue and local authority on flavor ban and overall regulatory issues is still alive in Ohio. That issue is not done. I don't want to talk too much about it because there's some things going on behind the scenes in light of the governor's veto. But I did read in the last 7 days that, as a case in point, Cleveland is entertaining a flavor ban on their own in the wake of the state legislature. So we're going to be keeping an eye on that issue, principally in the state of Ohio. Indiana, and I see Rob, you're on the call. There will be a diligent effort to reduce the tax cap level that was passed during the 23 legislative session. As you know, Rob, and the retailers in the state of Indiana, it was felt, and I mentioned this when we were out there in August, it was felt that it was important to get a tax cap on the books just to have a starting point, but it was way too high to come in at $1. So there will be a full court press effort to try to get that reduced, preferably to 50 cents, if not lower. There's been discussion of the 72-cent mark, but that's still too high. And that'll be a focus of our efforts in Indiana. We'll also be keeping an eye on smoking legislation, but there shouldn't be too many issues with that in Indiana, more at the local level, but we can talk more about that later. Illinois, there will be a reintroduction of a tax cap bill there. It's important that it be filed. I don't hold out a lot of promise for it, but it's important that it's filed. And it is picking up allies on both sides of the aisle. So we had some, when we had our National Conference of State Legislatures event in Indianapolis in August, we did have some Illinois legislators attend. So that tells us we do have some allies. In Michigan, there's currently a licensing bill. It's primarily for a local issue, but we did endorse the bill. There's also some chatter about trying to loosen up the licensing process in Michigan to allow for new establishments to come into the state, given that you had to be basically grandfathered in after they passed their Clean Air Act. Likewise, in Wisconsin, this is coming up, and there's a cigar bar bill, AB 451, that we've already endorsed, that Cigar Aficionado wrote a piece about this, but it's a piece of legislation that it's one paragraph. It would eliminate that grandfather date to allow for the creation of new cigar bars in the state of Wisconsin. Again, we've endorsed the bill. I've spoken with the sponsor's staff. There's a hope that it can get through the assembly before December and then take it up in the Senate after the first of the year. That's the preliminary strategy, but it's a good piece of legislation. In Minnesota, it'll be about protecting the existing tax cap. It always comes under threat. Every single year, we end up having to basically defend the tax cap in Minnesota, and also the flavor ban, which has been historically introduced, but doesn't get a lot of traction because of the fiscal impact primarily, but I have little doubt that that'll come back in 24. Iowa, likewise, protecting the existing tax cap. In Missouri, and Brian, I think you're on the call. We had a discussion earlier this afternoon. Brian Snyder of Missouri. We want a piece of legislation there that takes away local regulatory authority, that prevents local regulatory authority that could be in the form of tax, advertising, marketing, distribution, other forms of local regulation. And there's an existing bill to build upon, and we're going to be working together to try to perfect that bill so that it takes care of this, because historically over the last decade, as I recall it, there's been pockets of looming regulatory threats in Missouri, and such a piece of legislation would take care of that. And a very, very similar bill passed the South Carolina legislature this year. And there's numerous other examples of that as well. Oklahoma, all should be quiet and good. Kansas, all should be quiet and good. Though we keep an eye out on tax bills, Kansas has become a place where tax bills for increases are introduced and then don't get any traction, but we do keep an eye out on them. South Dakota, all should be well. North Dakota, I want to recognize Josette Dupree of Big Stick Cigars. She's a champion of her cigar bar bill that successfully got passed and signed by the governor in the state of North Dakota, and a great model for others, as Connecticut and North Dakota both got cigar bar bills passed in the 23 legislative session. And lastly, Nebraska, where I'm confident there will be a tax cap bill introduced. We'll be working with our retail partners in Nebraska on a tax cap piece of legislation. It was filed. They had a lot of internal problems in their legislature in 23, so not a lot of bills, a lot of traction as a whole. That hopefully won't be the case in 24, and hopefully we can build a good coalition to get a tax cap through. I think they're primed for one. So that's the lay of the land in the 13 states constituting the Midwestern call. Lastly, before we take off for questions, the tools that we provide for this season are the following. One, we've got a handbook for state associations, sort of a how-to manual. Several of our state partners on this call have active state associations: Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. Some others need some vigor and life put into them. We'll be working together on that. In other states, we need to start from the ground up and build state associations, and we can talk about those offline as well. But our handbook will be posted on our site, and it's a good reference manual for how to execute the work of a state association politically. Secondly, is grassroots advocacy on a lot of these bills. Uh, for example, the cigar bar bill in Wisconsin, the tax cap bill in Nebraska, as an example, in Indiana and Illinois, others, is that it's important to have grassroots advocacy. We help support that through form letters for you, the retail community, as well as consumers. And that comes through our cigaraction.org portal. That's all things states. And I hope that all the retail partners on this call and others listening will put a link to cigaraction.org on your respective websites. Help us build that grassroots foundation. Encourage your patrons, your consumers to go and contact information. All they need to do is put in their name and their zip code, and we take care of the rest. It's the one way we can mobilize the grassroots to support or kill given legislation any given year. Lastly, a collection of strategies that we encourage you to do. One is that you get with your retail partners and have a Capitol Hill Day. That you go to each of your respective state legislators' offices, introduce yourself, make sure they know you, you know them, know when their birthday is, know what their kids' names are. It should be a very personal type of relationship between you, the retailer, and the legislators that represent your store and your home, quite frankly. And that's how we build a coalition of retail supporters in the state legislatures. Calls and emails on legislation is critical, coming from you, the consumer, you, the citizen, you, the registered voter in your given state. And also, we encourage you to sponsor cigar town halls. Invite your legislators into your shop. Let them see your clientele. Let them see the demographic that's in your shop. Let them see that you're not marketing to children. Let them see the visual of getting over all these symbolic positions that our opposition uses to get at us. Let them see that a cigar shop does not represent the way that these other tobacco products are depicted in both the media and politically. And lastly, outreach to your consumer base, your patrons on legislation. You're the only conduit to get them engaged, and there's no other way to do that. And I'm trying to get a bill, and Josette in North Dakota can attest to this, on the way she got her customers to stack committee meetings to get a cigar bar bill through the North Dakota legislature. The same thing's going to happen in Wisconsin on a cigar bar bill, or to get a tax cap through in Nebraska or these others. So with that, those are the sort of a glossy overview of the strategies we encourage you to help us execute during the 2024 legislative season.